Right. Probably the main show of the night. We move on to item 16, Prince's Parade. Development and the provision of a new leisure centre, open spaces, play areas and housing for the area. The report gives the latest progress on the development and asks Cabinet to specifically agree the new provider for the leisure centre, approve the new budget for the development and ask for this to be included in the medium-term capital programme, to agree funding for the solar panels on the leisure centre, to progress the next stage of the development and finalise the construction contract, to agree to accept the £2 million BLRF grant. I will now ask Mr Madden to continue. Pardon?
We've not brought them in yet.
You're not brought them?
So do you want to break for a minute? Do you want to break for a minute, or do you want me to bring the consultant team in? Do you want to adjourn for a moment while we bring the consultant team in?
Oh yes, okay, yeah. I'm sorry, we haven't brought the consultants in. We've got consultants to come in, so we'll just adjourn while we bring those in.
Okay, thank you, Leader. The attached report is the update on Prince's Parade. The recommendations are set out as contained in the report, and a number of them. Predominantly, it's about updating the report, updating the progress on the project, and giving the latest details about the budget for the project to be approved, and certain other key decisions which need to be made. Within the report, there are a number of sort of fairly technical issues which members may wish to ask questions of. Also joining us tonight are members of the project team who have been working on the project for the last 15-18 months or so. So introduce Stephen Jepson, who is sitting over there from Hadron Consulting, who's leading the project team. And Stephen, I think you're going to introduce your project team.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So if I could just introduce the people that we've got with us this evening, so you know who's here. Where there's particular technical questions, then we'd be happy to answer those. So if I start myself, I'm Stephen Jepson. I'm a director at Hadron Consulting, and we're specialist project managers. And our role has been to oversee the consultant team, some of which you see here today, and the contractor, to work through design, to deal with site matters, to deal with the planning submissions that are being made, and then ultimately, if it goes to construction, to oversee the construction process. Dan, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So Dan Brenchley, I work for BAM Construction. I'm a construction manager and chartered MCIOB member, and I look after all of the matters that are relating to land remediation, road construction, and then developing on from that, drainage, phasing and bits and pieces like that for the main construction works. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Seamus, if you introduce yourself. I know we've got some stuff up, but we'll cover those later on as part of the questions. And if you press the button on the bottom left.
I'm a contaminated land expert, and a role in this job is to make sure that the thing gets looked at properly and gets planned properly and put through a safe and proper remediation scheme.
Jerry, if you can introduce yourself.
that's been sorted out. I would remind everybody that has just come in, this is being recorded, but just be aware of that.
Okay, microphone's working now. Jeremy Whitlock from ME Engineers. We are the building services engineers. I'm a technical director, electrical engineer. I'm the project manager, so I look after a team of mechanical, electrical and public health engineers and building physics and building technology engineers that deal with all the building services within any buildings, in this particular case, Prince's Parade. I'm a chartered engineer and a fellow at the Institute of Engineering and Technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Dean?
Yes, good evening everyone. I'm Dean Lucas. I'm a director at Faithful & Gould. We're the cost managers on the project. So I'm a chartered quantity surveyor with the MRICS. So I oversee our team of quantity surveyors on this project.
And finally, Simon.
So I'm Simon Molden, a director from the Sports Consultancy, and on this project been specifically working on the leisure management contract tender.
Thank you. If I can ask if there's any questions to the team, if it can be asked to me, and then I'll point you in the direction of the person I think is best placed to answer the question.
Okay, members. So we have this report before us, which I will propose. And do I have a seconder? David Godfrey. So over to you, members. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. Councillor Wybrow.
Didn't even have to put my hand up. Right, I've got a lot to say, as I'm sure you. I would be grateful if, preferably all of it, but if some of it could be minuted, because I think this is such a controversial issue, and I think there are gaps in the officer's report, and I think there's information that should be in the public domain.
Can I just clarify that with the? Is this recording the minute?
Well, we've got the recording here anyway, Councillor Wybrow. We will seek to include into the minutes. I'm not quite sure what you're going to say, what the detail is, but obviously we will go as far as we can to satisfy your need if that's the wish of members. But of course there is the recording here, so we will endeavour to do our very best for you.
Okay, it's just I'm aware the recording isn't available forever. It's only online for 6 months or so, isn't it? So. Okay, so a lot of my comments, a lot of my questions are on contamination. So the officer's report actually refers to the contaminants from the former landfill site being known. And actually I think there's still a lot of uncertainty, and we've got the LBH report here. I was going to read out quite a bit of it, perhaps I'll try not to read out all of it. But there are various paragraphs which actually imply that there's a lot more work to be done. So paragraph 6.1 says the investigation was constrained by the available budget. It also goes on to say that some groundwater monitoring was undertaken at an initial 6 positions, but consideration should now be given to the wider investigation of the groundwater around the whole site in order to better understand the presence, configuration and hydraulic continuity of the aquifers beneath the site, along with their chemical condition and temporal flow characteristics. It says some soil gas monitoring was undertaken at initial 19 positions. However, consideration should now similarly be given to a wider and more extensive investigation of the soil gas beneath each area of the site in order to enable satisfactory gas risk assessments to be concluded. The conclusion in paragraph 7 says, given the scale of the site, there are and will remain significant uncertainties regarding the potential content of the landfill. Paragraph 3.2, it says, it was previously suggested that the density of historical information for the site amounted to 1 exploratory position per 10,000 metres squared. Following the recent investigation, this density has improved to approximately 1 exploratory position per 1,300 metres squared. By comparison, it would require 3 times as many exploratory points to reduce the risk of missing some anomaly that was 25 metres across. And finally, I wanted to read out just the first line of paragraph 5.9. There are few documented studies of landfill reclamation work such as this being planned for this site. So it seems to me there's still a lot of work to be done. The officer's report doesn't actually mention what contaminants were found, but these include heavy metals such as arsenic, asbestos and polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which is what the local residents are particularly worried about at the moment. The gas testing, surprisingly, did not find any methane or VOC vapours, but that was found to be at odds with previous findings and was considered unlikely to be indicative of actual conditions on the site. The other thing that isn't mentioned in the officer's report is that a lot of the remediation options have had to be ruled out as unfeasible. So you can't remove all the landfill, for example, and neither can you contain it. So the option of clean cover isn't necessarily the best option, but it's probably the only option available. So I've now got quite a lot of questions. So the report implies that all the risk from the contamination and remediation work will rest with BAM. I asked for copies of or to cite of the clause in the BAM contract, but I haven't been given that, so obviously I would need some confirmation of that. I've also got an awful lot of questions, so I don't know whether it's worth doing one question at a time or read all my questions out in one go. I don't know what you prefer.
I'll ask the experts how they want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just as we going through, I'm just noting what I think the kind of headings are of the questions that are being asked, and then I'll ask probably each member. But I think it's best to. Apologies. I'm happy for the questions to be asked, and I think we can group them into some areas where we can answer those questions.
Okay.
And I'll bring in
both
them. Dan and Seamus to help me with that.
I'll read them all out. Okay.
Thank you.
So my first question is, where is the evidence that the capping clean cover will be sufficient to protect future residents and local residents, particularly in regards to the PAHs? Then have for the further investigations that will be required according to the conclusion of the LCA been costed in, and when will they take place? My understanding that there is some tidal flow under the site. Does this mean that some of the contaminants are leaking into the sea? Does the tidal flow mean that there is a risk of the contaminants being pushed upwards? An earlier contamination report stated that plastic water supplies pipes could not be used because of the risk of the PAHs penetrating them. Has this been taken into account? Has the effect of climate change and rising sea levels been taken into account in the proposed remediation? Is there any risk that the proposed drainage outfalls onto the beach will act as a pathway to direct the contamination onto the beach or into the sea? How can we be sure that the soil disturbances that have already been taken place on the site hasn't put local residents at risk from airborne particles? What measures will be put in place to measure airborne particles ready for when the work commences? And I include the vegetation clearance that's due to take place next month in that. Will a waste recovery permit be required? And if so, is it true that it generally takes 1 or 2 years to obtain such a permit? There will be a significant excavation of the landfill for the pool and for utilities. What controls will be applied to this activity and any movement of contaminated materials? Is there enough data about the contamination for the leisure centre area? So those are all my questions on contamination, but obviously I've got points on other issues as well for afterwards.
Thank you. Would you like to answer those questions?
Yeah, I'll try and group them into some of those areas, and I'll ask different people to cover them. So I think the first area probably we should focus on is the extent of the investigations that took place and why that's considered a suitable amount of investigations to inform the remediation strategy that's been put in place. I think, Dan, I'll probably ask you to start that, and if we need to bring Seamus in, we can bring Seamus in.
Yeah, so obviously the process of the contamination starts with the preliminary risk assessment. So that was done.
Could I ask you to lean forward to your microphone so we can hear
sure.
you?
So it starts with the preliminary risk assessment, which we undertook first, and then that forms the basis of the soil investigation requirements and geo-environmental environment requirements, which LBH have put together. We sent that out to tender to get a broad range of prices, so the council was being competitively tendered, that package, and that work was undertaken. On a site of this scale, you're never going to find every single piece of contamination on that site, but we're trying to find a broad range of materials across the site so we know what we're trying to deal with. We already had some existing information from the IDOM report that was undertaken previously, but that was restricted due to ecology and a few other issues across the sites, hence why it was a wider spanning set of information that was gathered. And we tried to do a more densely populated set of information requirements of where we're actually going to be constructing information, so where we're going to be constructing features such as the road and the leisure centre. Obviously the leisure centre itself is where a lot of the badger activity was, the existing badger activity, so the grouping around that area had to be quite carefully planned. But the more east of the site you go, the less sort of variable the conditions are. So hence why we've sort of been targeting the key areas in that sort of amount of testing that we've undertaken. So I mean, Seamus might be able to come in a little bit more in terms of the briefing that we were be provided, so we sent out to tender. So.
Yeah, the site investigation process is inevitably an iterative process, and at any stage you can't start and say this is what we're going to do and then that's the end of it. You have to look at what information you need, what gaps, what data gaps you've got, what uncertainties you have, and you plan something and you do it, and then you stop and you say, well, where are we now on the risk curve? What uncertainties have we reduced? Are we in a position now where we can say, look, we've definitely got a solution that we can do and apply to this, or a definite answer to a question? So the context of where we are at the moment is that we've got enough information to process certain decisions, and there are other areas where more investigation will be undertaken. And because of the nature of this site, as Dan has said, there will be inevitably certain amount of discovery to be done as the actual work proceeds, and so it's an ongoing process, if you like.
And Seamus, in terms of the process that's being carried out and the approvals that are required for that, who do you engage with and what approvals are needed through that process?
Yeah, in terms of planning, there's a requirement, so you can see it in the planning conditions, requirement to have approval to the strategy and the assessment, and that's being undertaken at the moment on behalf of this council, externally, I believe, by, I think it's RPS, I may be wrong, is it? Yeah, there's an external consultant like myself who's looking at it. I haven't had their feedback yet, but they'll be looking to see that it meets the required standard.
And then in terms of the contamination that's been found and the measures that are being taken to deal with that contamination and effectively make it a safe site in terms of the initial works that are carried out, but also the completed works, what have we found and how are we dealing with that?
There's two things. Under the planning regime, the strict requirement under the NPPF is that you produce a site that cannot be regarded as a potential Part 2A candidate of the Environmental Protection Act, and that it should be safe for use. Now, that's something that's judged by the local authority environmental health team and generally nationally about environmental standards and what we expect to be produced. And obviously, the standards that we apply to a residential house with children playing in a garden is different to what we apply to someone visiting the leisure centre. So there's a rake of different rules, if you like, or guidance to apply to different scenarios. Yes.
Can you explain the process in terms of what's done with the material and how that the pathways are severed between any contamination and the future uses of those sites?
Well, there's different. The aim of the assessment, for those who've read the report, the aim of the assessment is to identify a range of potential pathways and to identify those. These are pathway linkages. So source pathway receptor linkages, and to identify those that are considered to be unacceptable or the risk is too high of harm being caused. And in those circumstances, you look at various ways of dealing with the linkage. Now, that can be either removing the source, it can be isolating the source, encapsulating the source, it can be providing some barrier or interrupting the pathway, or it can, in some cases, it can be protecting the receptor somehow. So you can imagine there's a lot of different solutions to be applied, and there's more than one going to be in operation at this site. There are different mitigation things, as you can see, being put up.
And there was a question around the clean cover and the clean cover approach and whether that would be sufficient. Could you just explain what clean cover means and why we're doing it and why we think that's sufficient?
Well, it's like a capping. I mean, and the idea of capping landfills to prevent unwanted contact in some respects with contaminated ground beneath, and to prevent vapours coming up from contaminated land beneath. That's been a process that's been it's been around for a very long time. I was just going to show you. I've got the book I've got here was produced in the 1980s by NATO. That's 1981 or so. It's the NATO Challenges of Modern Society, and it basically addresses how to cap a landfill and a clean cover version. Now, the author of this book, Michael Smith, I actually was speaking to him yesterday on one of our forums about something else. It's still the same recipe, except this is the 80s, so we're, 40 years on. We've got a fair bit of experience of applying the technology. We know what to do in what circumstances.
So Seamus, it sounds what you're saying there is the process that we're undertaking is a well-used process that's used across the UK to deal with these types of site and for the type of end uses that we will have.
Yes, the specifics of this site is it's a landfill, which is a bit unusual. So in other cases we're doing with, as I've alluded to previously, gasworks and industrial sites that are really heavily contaminated. And there's been a lot of sites dealt with inadvertently that were historic landfills and no one appreciated at the time. Now we're a bit clearer about what is and what isn't. But yeah, the basic science is good science and it's well applied.
And Seamus, in terms of the type of contamination, a level of contaminations, is this worse than you've seen on other sites, or similar, or actually not comparable?
It's very comparable. There's something like 1,500 coastal landfill sites like this around the country at the moment, and some of them are worse than others. This one is in a good position. And it doesn't seem to be outrageously contaminated. I think that's a legacy thing. There's no huge dockyards or heavy industry around here that's been filling them up with toxic waste, as you might say. That's my take on it. And that this genuinely was, I believe, a municipal tip. And it's got various stuff in it, but nothing that sort of ranks with sort of the coal tars from or ammoniacal liquors from a gasworks or something like that. The sort of levels of contamination in those circumstances, like 20 times what we're seeing now.
There was a specific question about methane and methane gases. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, there's a way to go with meeting the standards that are required these days for residential housing in terms of getting a house builder's warranty, an HBC or similar. And that's a set piece in terms of the amount of evidence that's required to design the system, and the house builder will have to go through that process, which will probably mean more monitoring and so forth. For the leisure centre, we've been able to jump in and say, look, we're putting in, if you like, a Rolls-Royce solution. We're doing the top level of gas and VOC membranes that you can have. So we're putting in place measures. We're putting in place membranes, methane membranes, to deal with if there are any methane gases on site, but I don't think anything has been picked up through the results that suggests there's methane. No, they have previously. One would expect it, but we have to deal with the evidence we have. But I'm putting it in the context of what I expect to see, and it is a well-ventilated site. We've seen much higher methane levels on other sites than have been measured on this one previously. But nevertheless, you've got to expect that there is the risk of it, as well as expecting the risk that there might be other volatiles. So we have to protect against that.
Thank you. So basically what we're saying is that we are assuming there's methane there and we are putting measures in place to deal with that. Okay, thank you. There was a particular question around BAM and the liability with BAM, and also around, I think it was probably to do with further costs. I think, Dan, can you just explain in terms of the position that we've reached with BAM in terms of the liability for carrying out those works and the associated cost?
Yeah, sure. So just to give you a bit of context, so BAM are a design and build contractor. Irrespective of the contamination issue, we take all the risk from once we've agreed a financial close on a project all the way through the contract. So if we do find something on that site, we will deal with it in the right way, in the right manner. equally, if there was, design development on the frame, or we needed to make bigger steel work, or any other change from this point on, we take that onerous on. Basically, that is the point of that form of contract. So in this scenario, the contamination is obviously a big challenge on this project, and hence we have allowed some monies in our contract to cover that. But that will be capped. So the council, it wouldn't go up from our figure, and we are down to deal with that from day one all the way through to the end, the verification report and the handover to the housing contractor, and use of the leisure centre. So.
And Dan, there was a particular question around airborne particles and how do we make sure that's not an issue in terms of the works that are being carried out?
Okay, so it's quite a large site. So the way we undertake the work will be in phases and dedicated work parcels. To restrict the amount of area we're removing and dealing with in any one time. So that is one element of mitigation. The second element of mitigation is obviously we're digging up some of this material. A lot of the movement of material is in the very top layers, so it isn't vast amounts of excavation, but there will be some elements of excavation for the pool tanks, drainage, ducting, all those elements there. There are some other bigger excavations for the canoe centre on the corner, some road infrastructure improvements. So those elements will be dealt with very locally. They will be treated in terms of water suppression, coverage of the materials. Some of it depends on what we find, and we're never going to dig up every ounce of that site to find out exactly what we're going to be dealing with. So we're going to have a range of issues on site that we know we're going to be deploying at any one time. And when we're doing that work, we've got monitoring stations, we've got occupational health for the guys on site, as well as the boundary protection for the public. All those points will be triggering different scenarios to be implemented at any one time. So there's no sort of one catch-all sort of solution to any of these items, but it means we've got to have the materials on site, and we've got to have the forethought and the ideas to deal with these scenarios, and the monitoring and the sort of testing regimes that go along with it. So yeah, I think that sort of covers most of those points, I think.
And Dan, just in terms of the testing and the amount of testing that you do, can you just explain that as well?
There's various amounts of testing to do depending on what you're doing with the material. So some of the material will be moved on site to build up levels, to gain that sort of building platform that we're trying to achieve at different levels, because obviously it's very undulating at the moment. So moving that material will undertake some testing and quite rigorous testing throughout that process. We have to do it for our own health and safety requirements for the guys who are actually handling the materials, let alone the public and people that are walking past the site. The rates of testing will come out in Seamus's reports and our sort of verification processes and our working practices. So the actual sampling requirements is sort of endless really in terms of what we would be doing, but the sampling at the edges of the site for the public, which is probably what you're most concerned about. Normal standards is for, effectively we call them frisbees or jam jars around the outside of the site, and they just collect dust and data. We send that off to the lab and we get it checked out. At that point it's too late to do anything. We've sampled it. If it has got asbestos or any other fibres in it, it is too late to sort of counter-react. So what we're doing is on this site we're providing active monitoring. So there is active dust monitoring at the boundaries of the site. Normally in this site, because the prevailing wind is southwesterly, it's going to be on the northern boundary of the site. So that is actively sampling. We'll set threshold levels in that software, and we get automatically told if they're starting to exceed our threshold levels. So that is way before it becomes an actual issue, and if we need to add in another mitigation measure or deploy another one of our techniques. So that's sort of over and above what we'd normally do on a normal site. So.
Dan, there was a question around the permits that are required for the works to be carried out and how long that process takes.
Yeah, so there's various different permit requirements. An extraction permit isn't required on this site, and that is what's been documented from the Environment Agency back from our contractor's remediation implementation plan. So that implementation plan is a follow-on from a specification that is produced by LBH. So our contractors looked at it and said, look, this is how we're going to deal with the issues, this is how we're going to conduct our works. It's not a physical method statement and a derived exactly what they're going to do, but it's a solutions manual effectively. So they've looked at that solutions manual, the implementation plan, and they've said, no, you don't need an extraction permit. So we're undertaking the works in that clean cover that's existing and treating the soils that we're finding in drainage arisings, basically.
And Dan, a slightly related question was around the drainage outfall to the beach and tidal flows. I think they're possibly related, but in terms of is that drainage outfall to the beach, either, I guess, in terms of the construction of it and the future potential for contamination to find its way to the beach?
Yeah, so there's a couple of points in that. So the drainage outfalls themselves are in the beach material, so they're being piled with timber piles, and all the work will be carried out on the beach. So there's no contamination in the beach element that we know of, and don't expect any to be raised. But the timber piling is a displacement solution, so nothing will be dragged up from the ground. It is just pushing basically big lumps of timber in the ground, and they've been installed all the way along the coastline, along this element of coastline. So I haven't got any issues with that. The drainage obviously then is being taken from the development and pushed out to sea through these they're slightly attenuated flows because we have got some on-site attenuation, but no pollutants, if you like, from the contamination will make their way through that system. This system is a closed type system, so the way the rainfall works, it obviously lands on the hard landscaping elements. That will go through anything that's got a road or a parking area. That will go through oil interceptors, and it will be polished, and the water will go out to sea clean, a lot cleaner than it is at the moment because it's going directly off the road to the beach.
And Seamus, I think this is probably a question for you around tidal flow and whether the tidal flow will push up contaminants.
Yes. We not at the moment, from the boreholes that have been put in and the water monitoring that's been undertaken, we haven't found any contamination in the groundwater there. Not to say that it wasn't there in the past or might not be in the future given the circumstances. So we don't take that as the end of the story. In terms of the question about would it be pushing pollution up, no, what you tend to get where you do have contamination of the groundwater in these circumstances, you get a smear zone within the range of the movement of the water in the tidal zone, and that is basically the stuff that's clinging to the soil particles, so the hydrocarbons and the pHs and things will tend to collect in that zone. So it's a very obvious oily, dirty zone that stays there, and it's not being pushed upwards, to answer the question, but it will just stay in that zone there. Anything that's not mobile, there may have been more mobile elements in the past or something, but not now.
And Seamus, would climate change have any impact on that?
Well, we're looking at climate change. We've got, like I say, we've got 1,500 of these sites around the country, and we're looking at climate change at the moment. One of the things I do is I head up the CLARE research group, technical research group, which has got a project at the moment, RP27, kicked off last year with about 10 universities looking at solutions for coastal landscapes, because it's a known thing if you're a scientist that if you introduce salt water, it's more it'll mobilize more contamination than fresh water will, for example, because of the high salt content, and those sort of things. They're sort of inevitable, and we've got to think about them. In this case of this site, there's two things we can say. One is overall the plan or the strategy to get a drainage system across the site to reduce the infiltration of water through the site, or to prevent the infiltration of water through the site, that will stop the ability of water to mobilize stuff in the first place. And secondly, that the water won't it won't come out to sea.
Okay, and I think the last one, if I've picked up everything, was around the use of plastic pipes and any particular impact on those.
Yeah, so this is not thing just for this site. Plastic pipes in contaminated land or land that's got chemical contents in, we would always provide a barrier pipe. So it's called a barrier pipe. It's basically a pipe within a pipe. So the outer layer of the pipe is touching the contamination. In this scenario, we will be doing that anyway, but the corridors for gas, water, BT, all the infrastructure, the comms, the electrics, everything are in clean cover service corridors. So any new infrastructure that is likely to be adjusted, dug up, modified, that is going to be dug out, removed from that zone, the trench lined and backfilled with clean material. So anybody going back in there from one of the statutory authorities digging in that location won't be digging through this material in the future. So, yeah.
I think I've gone through the list, although I'm prepared to be, if there's further questions, to take those.
Yeah, no, that was really helpful, thank you. Just the one thing I just want to just go back over. I mean, you talked about the active monitoring of the airborne particles. I mean, local residents in my constituency are very worried about the work that's already been done, and obviously there will be work done next month. Are you going to be monitoring airborne particles next month? And can I reassure them that what you've done so far is safe, and how can I reassure them?
Yeah, so the work that has been done to date is fine, and there's nothing wrong with what we've done. We have just stripped off the very top layer of vegetation for the ecology zone, and in that zone there, that is right at the edge of the landfill element, so it tapers away, so it's like a big basin effectively. So we've got circa 4 metres in the middle of it, but this is right on the edge. So there are elements of brick and sort of masonry elements, but they're not any concern what we've done to date. In terms of the vegetation strip proposed, we're mainly removing the thicker sort of tree, if you call them trees and shrubs, at this point in time, to remove those prior to the nesting bird season starting in March. So we won't be removing the rest of the vegetation right down to bare soil. So that, just to clear that up. We won't be doing that really until the hoarding's up and we've got something to monitor against and conceal the site area really.
Got lots of questions on other subjects. Do you want me to carry on, or do you want other people to do contamination first? I need to, okay. Right.
Leader, can I just, because would it be better if there were any more questions on contamination? Would it be better if there were any more questions on contamination to ask them now?
On contamination?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask a very straightforward question, really, a couple of very straightforward questions. First of all, you talked about you've got 1,500 sites very similar to this. Have you had any issues on them in terms of the contamination, anything that's arisen out of that perhaps you were not aware of or that you've had to deal with?
There's very few of them that anyone has got any money to do anything about at the moment other than investigate them. So most of them are legacy sites, and I'm sorry to say that you can see photographs if you look online of a lot of these ones where we haven't the fortunate position where this is behind the sea bar. A lot of them are literally eroded in river estuaries and so forth, and there's black bags falling into the sea. So there are obvious issues, but nothing, just to answer your question, there's nothing to be learned from that work. It's in its very early days, this project that's going forward at the moment to try and come up with solutions.
Councillor Wimble?
Can I just ask one more question?
Okay.
I just wanted to really ask a straightforward question. Are you convinced and are you happy that whatever you're going to do, the finished article, that it's going to be safe for the local people and safe for all of us, and safe for the residential properties and for people using the leisure centre? I think that's what people want to know. Will it be safe? Can you confirm that it will be safe?
Yes, the principle of the whole thing is that it will be suitable for use and it will be done without harm to the environment or to the local neighbourhood. And from that point of view, the project, if you stand back and look at it, is taking something that is questionable, it must be questionable as it stands at the moment, and turning it into something that's going to be safe, or regarded as safe, for the future Hythe residents, unlike these other landfills I've mentioned.
Oh, sorry. Just one more.
Do you know what the last one means?
Sorry. No, you made me forget. Oh, no, sorry, it's gone completely.
Councillor Wimble.
Thank you, Leader. Last night at our planning meeting, I had to leave the chamber at this point, but I was watching online, and one of the people that was speaking said that never in the history of UK construction has a site as contaminated as this been built on. Well, I know along with Councillor Godfrey there, we sit on New Leaf, which obviously deals with nuclear sites. Can you just confirm that this is not your average building site? We know that. We know there's contaminants there, but this is a doable project.
Yes, it's very doable. I mean, we built on Millennium Dome. That was a contaminated land site. Built on the Olympic Park. There's residential parkland there. That's been remediated, been dealt with by BAM Nuttall, our sister company. We're now building a school alongside LBH-GO, as they now are, in Surrey at the moment, dealing with a site very similar to this. It's inland, it's got groundwater issues. It's not a beach coastal location, but it's got just the same sort of contamination as this. So yeah, no issue at all, and we're working with this consultant on another project live now.
Councillor Prater.
Thank you, and thank you for making a difficult subject easier for me. Your reports are detailed, which for those of us who don't do this for a living is hard. There was a difference in language in the reports from the way that I would have phrased things. The main remediation approach that seems to be pursued for the sites, they're defined in the remediation activities for a large part of the site, are defined in the remediation activities RE6, RE7 and RE8. It's effectively provision of a marker membrane, importation of clean materials on top of that, and then provision of clean cover on the soft landscaping on top of that. So, in my mind, remediation is that you're fixing the problem. As far as I understand it from here, what you're actually doing is site capping, which is putting a sheet over the top of it, a semi-permeable sheet over the top of it, brightly coloured semi-permeable sheet, as far as I can tell, so you know when you've hit evil. You then piling a metre of clean material on top of that, and then you're going to build a house on top of that. That is essentially the approach that you're going to. So you're going to have your sheet layer up to 900 mil, I think it said in one report, of clean soil on top of that, and that's likely to be a back garden. The sort of depth that you've got in the back garden of those properties. So you're effectively looking at, you're building only 900 centimetres above a sheet, which tells you tells you if you're planting a tree to stop digging right now. And that's, I just want to check that that's my understanding. That is actually what site capping is. It's a sheet. It's not a cap. It's not concrete. It's not that. It's a semi-permeable sheet that you know that you've just reached that layer of evil. Leave it alone.
No. That would be correct in some circumstances, but it changes. As I say, we have different receptors and different exposure or risks of exposure in different scenarios. So the sheet becomes what amounts to a butyl membrane in the pool building, in the leisure centre, so nothing can come in. In the houses, a similar approach. You cannot risk there being any build-up of anything in the houses. Externally, we look at what could come through if you had that sort of a solution, a permeable solution, as to what vapours could come through, and there'll be some monitoring to be done to show that either there's no vapours or the situation will be processed to a layer to a state where nothing can come up and cause harm. So we have different solutions. The most difficult scenario, which is one for the regulator, is where you've got a private housing with a private garden, and you don't have the controls that you have in the leisure centre will have a health and safety pack, and there'll be control of every contractor who does anything there in the future. A private garden, you just might lose that control. So you have to think very carefully about how that gets developed. And in some cases, the answer is not to allow anything more than patios or something. If you're that concerned, there are scenarios where different solutions come in, but that's all to be decided.
Councillor Prater.
Thank you. So it's different densities of membrane depending on what you're building. It might be semi-permeable in garden areas. It might be a slightly thicker, but it's essentially a sheet. It's a plastic sheet. under the other things. I fully accept that we're talking something different when we get to the swimming pool area, because then we're into landfill mining, as I understand, as opposed to landfill capping. And there's a discussion of mining there, because you're digging a hole in it. You're down into the difficult area, and you're digging a hole in order to make the swimming pool basins, and you're then going to line those out. The difficulty I have with the report there is that, as it said, that there are a few documented studies of landfill reclamation works, such as is being planned on this site, and these examples invariably predate the changing regulatory position of the Environment Agency. I've Babel-fished that, and I think that means it's very rarely been done before and not under the current law at all.
Thank you. It has been done before, and we're putting a school, as Dan has said, right now on a similar landfill site. It's not been recognised, as I was trying to say earlier, that the recognition of these historic landfills hasn't been good, and so a lot of things have been built on them without people necessarily being aware that they were dealing with a historic landfill. This landfill predates the 1974 Control of Pollution Act. That's the point about it. So it's not been caught by the sort of requirements under the waste regulations to be remediated, and it has been remediated in the sense it's been decommissioned and capped around the millennium time. There was an exercise to put canal dredging on it. But it's because it's so old, and there are a lot like this that haven't been recognised. So in that sense, it has been done. In terms of the contamination there, regardless of the origins or where it's come from, the contamination and the solutions for the contamination are well tried and tested. So we have similar contamination, we have similar risks on a lot of sites, or worse.
Councillor Prater.
Thank you. I think that's slightly reassuring, but I'm slightly. The one other thing one of the question I had is that you've gone through testing, you've gone through a number of phases of testing, and it's very reassuring to hear that that's an ongoing process, very iterative, as you mentioned. You've got enough information now for certain decisions, but that's ongoing. What I don't get, from BAM's point of view, is how you can offer a fixed price on that basis, because obviously you might find something else, and I know you've built in a contingency for that, for a certain amount of something else, but there could be dragons in here. Unlikely actual dragons, but whales. If you find something, is there no limit to that fixed term, that fixed price contract? Is there nothing in those terms which you turn around and go, actually, that's outside what we can deal with under the fixed price of that? Or is it genuinely unmovable to the stage of your bankruptcy?
Yeah, we've done enough testing on that site to have a good range of ideas of what's buried under there. You might find a little bit more of this over there, and you might find a little bit less of it over there. But we've profiled that site and done enough work to satisfy ourselves financially that we're covered as a business. We're a massive business, £1 billion turnover in the UK. So bankruptcy is not an option for BAM at this point in time for this project. We're a massive business. So yes, I'm comfortable. We've given the council a price that's been tendered and tested and processed by third-party QS businesses. So yeah, I'm happy with that situation financially, and we wouldn't have offered it if we weren't.
Thank you. Councillor Hornsby, if you remember what your question was?
I have, actually. Yes, I was going to say that if we didn't do something now, would it be necessary to carry out some work in the future?
I'll start that one off, and Seamus might chip in. So the situation where you've got at the minute is you're planning to do something. So you're planning to do a development, and you're closing those conditions out of a remediation plan and verification plan to deliver that site back as a safe piece of land. if you weren't doing that, you should be coming up with a different plan. So we haven't risk assessed a different solution, and we haven't gone through those hoops. But if this was not to carry on going, yes, you would need to do something else. I mean, Seamus might have a technical view on that, but in simple terms, that you would need to do something going forward.
So I'm sure you're probably aware of that the Part 2A of the Environment Act places a duty on local authorities to survey their areas and to identify sites that do pose a contamination risk or a certain class of contamination risk. And there is a liability and a requirement to do something and to keep an eye on them. This site doesn't fall into that category, and the reassurance you can have is that under the planning laws, this is not really technical, but it's under the planning laws, the requirement, the bar for remediation is such that the site cannot be considered as a candidate for Part 2A. So that's the test of the remediation. So in a sense, strictly speaking, the liabilities of the council, you wouldn't expect there to be something, but we've talked about climate change, we've talked about things in the future. It is probably not right to say that there would never be any need to do anything with the site.
Okay, are there any more questions on contamination? Councillor Peel.
It was only in reference to that, and Andrew Rush is here today as well. We recently passed the contaminated land strategy in this chamber, which would require us to be to consider action now that we know that the site has issues. So whatever we do, there is costs going forward related to this site. So we just have to bear that in mind.
Thank you. Have we done with contamination? If so, can we move on to the next subject? Councillor Wybrow.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't specifically have any questions on the ecology, because my view is that a lot of the ecology has already been destroyed. We've excluded the badgers from their sets and forced them to live somewhere else. The reptiles have been forcibly removed to a new habitat, the preparation of which involved the destruction of numerous trees and the use of herbicide. And the maritime grassland, which was of local ecological interest, has just been dug up. There's been no thought given to the unprotected animals that live on the site, nor to the nesting and migrating birds and the insects. So, I disagree. There is a comment at the end of the report saying that it's an overall positive for conservation and wildlife, and I just can't agree with that, because even if we do eventually create new habitats, it's going to take them a long while to re-establish. So then I'm moving on to the leisure centre and energy. So I'm pleased that an energy study has been carried out and that this would lead to reduced carbon emissions. And I welcome the addition of solar panels, but I think we could have done a lot better than this, because Exeter have managed to build a new leisure centre to Passive House standards. And I was just wondering how the performance of the proposed leisure centre will compare with the Exeter Leisure Centre, if someone could answer that question, please.
Jerry, could you answer that, please?
Yes, indeed. So Passive House is a very technical solution to building control. Exeter are at the forefront of this. They have already established in residential premises Passive House and some schools where Passive House will work relatively easily and can be controlled in those environments, because you're talking about people sitting in classrooms and fairly sedimentary environments. When you look at leisure centres and you're looking at the physical activities and environment in a leisure centre, Passive House will be very difficult as a newbie to start for us. At Exeter have some excellent data because of the work they've done previously and learnt from their residential passivents. So they're applying some of those techniques into their Exeter Leisure Centre. One of the main issues with Passivent is the build-up of the thermal properties of the walls, foundations, glazing, doors, etc., triple glazing and things like this. Our leisure centre, to start with, is within the confines of planning and budget constraints. So the decision by the architect's practice at the time of the stage 2 and the development of the scheme was the proposed solution of what we've ended up at Prince's Parade. GT3 architects are currently working on a Passivent scheme in Surrey. So they utilise, and they're very environmentally conscious of their buildings. So our leisure centre, the orientation of our leisure centre has been worked with us as building services engineers, where we look at the building physics of buildings, and we say, if you put the glazing on the north side of the building, you'll reduce the glare into the pool. There's lots of issues as building services people we have to look at, and certainly health and safety to people like swimmers is crucial. We don't want the sun glaring onto the pool where you could potentially have children underwater not being seen by our lifeguards. We do have pool view cameras as well, but we want to take as many precautions as we can. So we put our windows on the north face, and that also helps with our environmental conditions of the pool. So that's one reason why we put it around that way. Our particular building has a lot of movement. Swimming, high humidity, high temperature needed for comfortable swimmers. We have our fitness suite, again, high energy, lots of exercise, workouts. So you can't just rely on anything like a natural ventilation system. It's not sufficient, 2 reasons. One is the occupants need a level of fresh air. Now, we have to comply with our building regulations, and we also have to comply with our CIBSE, Chartered Institute of Building Service Engineers, requirements that are accepted and acknowledged by building regulations and government. So we have to comply with those. So we always have this aspect of trying to drive energy costs down and carbon emissions down. We're absolutely behind that. We always want to do that. We always want to have natural daylight. We always want to have natural ventilation. But we have to look at the building use and decide how our right solution is for that environment. After, we want people to come to the leisure centre and use it comfortably and do their workouts without feeling hot and sweaty. The guys that do the workouts, they want to feel comfortable in their environment, and they want to go there. And they don't want to go in there and say, I was not comfortable in there, I'm going to go to another leisure centre. We've just completed, with BAM and our team here, Dover Leisure Centre. And that centre has high energy similarly. So we've done lessons learned, and we've done some tweaks to our design. We've improved our U values, which is our thermal build-ups, not to passive vent levels because they're very, very good, but over and above the building regulations. Our planning was to achieve, generally, building regulations, and we could have just ticked that box, but we pushed it a bit more, and although the percentages seem low, they are significant because building regulations and the development of building regulations is all about driving our carbon emissions and our carbon footprint and improving that, driving our energy efficiencies down. So there's lots of things that we, in terms of design and purchase, so even products we install, air ventilation systems, they have certification via Europe, 28 European regulations, to improve things like fan power and things like so, constantly driving the electricity down to produce the air and around the systems, and the same with pumps. Same with lighting, so our lumens per circuit watts is much better than the UV LEDs we use. So all of the systems we've put in there are improvements on our energy and our carbon footprint overall. And with the addition of PVs, we can improve on that even more. The thing about PVs is that we can put thousands of meters of PVs and produce lots of electricity, but it has to be used in the building. And so if we don't use it in the building, it's wasted, it's lost, unless we store it in batteries. And that's really not appropriate for a leisure centre. So I accept that, and I've had the discussions with our team about the level of PVs we've put in, and our 300 metres squared is what's being proposed. It's about right to give me electricity that I can use in the building during the day to run our fans and our pumps and our systems. So we are looking very efficient systems. And finally, we also have building management systems that monitor all these things and automatically adjust them to suit how we set the building up. With passive vents, you actually have to have almost trained professionals to be able to run the leisure centre. So it's not just like an operator, standard operator situation. You actually need almost engineering people that understand the principles. Because if you don't act in a certain way of passive vents by leaving things operational and not switching them off, a common thing is to switch things off to save energy. Passive vent, if you do that, you actually affect the whole operation and unbalance the system and cause more trouble than it's worth. So all things considered, we feel we've got the right solutions, and as much energy saving as we possibly can within the planning and budgetary constraints.
Thank you for that. Anybody else have any questions on that? Anybody got any questions further on the recommendations? Councillor Godfrey.
It has been mentioned, the badges have been mentioned twice this evening, but I have had residents ask me for comfort that they've settled into their new environment and they're not trying to go back to where they were, and that this will be monitored ongoing to make sure they're protected. I would like just some confirmation of that.
Just clarify the question. Is it in terms of the
David, would you turn your mic on?
during construction? Sorry. Is it during construction or after completion of the works?
It wasn't actually very clear to me, but I'm assuming it's ongoing until the construction is completed.
So Dan, can you answer that one?
Yeah. So the air monitoring will be deployed and there all the way through construction all the time. We're doing dusty activities. So that will be sampling and checking all that air and volumes and everything all the way through construction activities.
That wasn't really my question. My question was monitoring the activity of the badgers to make sure they're looked after going forward. And that's the question I got coming from.
Sorry, okay. That makes a bit more sense.
From my residents.
So yes.
David, would you switch your mic off?
Oh, sorry.
So the ecologists, obviously we've constructed the set. We've seen activity there and they've been using the set. We try and retreat from that point at that point in time just to try and let them settle in. We don't want any more disturbance as much as we can. But yeah, there will be monitoring ongoing throughout the contract. I think they've got watch and brief through the whole of the period of on-site works. So we have to make sure no reptiles are getting back onto the site while we're doing the works and monitor the ecology situation throughout. Yes. So.
Councillor Wybrow?
Yes, thank you. No, my next question, I have been given an answer, but I think it's such an important point that it needs to be in the public domain. I asked when and how long was the residential land advertised for and how many bidders were there. We're talking about a disposal of £26.6 million worth of public land. So I think we do need to set out how that came about. And actually linked to that, I've got a question at the end that the Finance Officer's comments that there is a risk of progressing the main contractual commitments without secured capital receipts. And obviously we haven't actually signed off on the sale of the residential land as far as I understand. So, how does that affect it?
Thank you. In terms of the response that was given to you, written response, I'm just seeing whether a colleague has actually got it in front of them so they can read it out for the benefit of the tape. Tim, are you able to pull that up? If we could take that first, Leslie, sorry, Councillor Wybrow, I think that's your first question about having that in the public domain. So, Mr. Madden, can you just read that response out? Thank you.
Yes, of course. So, just to repeat the response I gave to Councillor Wybrow previously, the residential land was marketed via BNP Paribas Real Estates. They contacted over 40 parties comprising of both local, regional and national developers and house builders, and of these 13 parties registered in the interest of the scheme. I think you subsequently asked a question about the basis of the choice, whether it's purely on price, and said final decision based on price but also upon other aspects such as community assets provided, the certainty of developers and its ability to meet planning requirements. So that was the response I gave you, Councillor Wybrow.
Councillor Wybrow.
That's true, yes. Certainty if the contract hasn't been signed.
In terms of your second question, Councillor Wybrow, thank you, Tim. Yes, well, we are in the position of agreeing the contract with the successful bidder. That will continue its negotiations and we expect a successful conclusion. So until such time that we get to that point, that's why we've highlighted the risk for members, but it is active conversations now. I don't think from colleagues that we've got anything other to add other than reassurances that we are subject to your decisions, continuing to have those conversations.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think the next area is the area I'm most concerned about, and it's the funding of the project. So I am really grateful that the numbers are in the public domain, that we didn't have to argue for that. I think it's really great that you've done that. There is no surprise that the cost has gone up by 60 million, I don't think, and I think it's a shame that we didn't look more closely at Martello Lakes, given that we are now in this position. I am personally not at all happy to borrow nearly £7 million to cover the funding gap. I was told today that we're looking at repaying this over 50 years. Now, that's relying on income from a leisure centre, which I don't think will still be running in 50 years, I think, because of the way it's being designed. So it's not totally designed in for climate change. I think it will be obsolete much, much before 50 years. So I'm not at all happy with that. The other funding, so we're using some Imperial Hotel Development Section 106 monies, which was meant for off-site affordable housing. And yet we're only going to get, in terms of numbers of houses, the 30% that was due from Prince's Parade itself and the 22% that's due from the old swimming pool site. So Hythe will effectively lose those houses that could have been funded from the Imperial money. And also, what guarantee is there that the residential developer will actually provide those affordable housing and won't turn around later on and saying, oh, well, it's not financially viable after all? Just one question on the Canoe Club money. You know, we're doing £200,000 of work for them, which they're due to repay us. Are we sure that they have actually raised the money to do that? I also got a few doubts about the way the SIL has been worked out and the priorities of that. I thank James earlier for the very detailed response that he gave me. You know, I think one thing that could have been made much clearer in the report is that it's forecast that there will be 11 million of SIL by 23-24, because at the moment there's less than 1 million, so it just didn't make sense to me that we were looking at 2.5 million and another 650,000 for this project. So, you know, I'm not happy with the SIL, but I accept that. But it is the loan over the 10 or 50 years that's bothering me. But I would just like to answer this question on the Canoe Club money and the guarantee on the affordable housing.
Have to take that. With regard to the Canoe Club's money, we have been in discussions with the Canoe Club, and the funding they have through a variety of sources, both their own 106s and the various grants that they've been awarded, that they have funding to be able to achieve that. It was always meant to be on. There are various technical reasons why it is important to do the work there whilst the development is being undertaken. But we were doing it in a way that matched the funding that they had, and we've been in ongoing negotiations with them. In terms of the Section 106, when we went out for the residential bids, we were very clear about the requirements for Section 106 commitments, and the successful bid has been provided on the basis of meeting all those did I say Section 1? All the affordable housing commitments. That is the basis of the bid and their offer. And maybe Andy would back up in the discussions. We were really quite pushing on that to ensure that their bid included that element as well. So as far as we are concerned, the offer is based on achieving the 30% on the Prince's Parade site and 22% on the South Road site.
Just following that from Tim, I can confirm that there was a lot of discussion around the 106 and pushback to the developers, and they did come back and confirm on more than one occasion that the 30% affordable would be met.
Councillor Prater.
Thank you. I really can't follow my friend Leslie Wybrow as Cabinet Member for asking excellent, detailed and forensic questions, so I'm not going to try. I'm going to try and focus on the broader principle of the costings that we've now got in front of us. Because when we argued this at full council in June 2019, the council actually voted to stop this process, but the costs of this development were then defined as £29 million, which was stated to lead with a projected about £1 million surplus at that. That's the financial case that those who voted in favour of continuing with the Prince's Parade process stood their ground. It's the financial case which they dismissed this proposal to build at Martello Lakes, because the proposal to build at Martello Lakes, we argued at the time, there are about £10 million of Section 106 and potential capital receipts already budgeted in there. And the costings of Sports England inflated in 2018, which inflated for a 6-lane pool plus learner pool, a 4-court hall, 100-station health gym and 2 studios. They costed that in at £9.77 million, adjusted by inflation, which is a better facility than offered at Prince's Parade because it includes a sports hall, but it had an affordability gap, definitely, between the Section 106 and other capital funds and what were there, of about £1 million. So effectively, there was the Prince's Parade, which made you £1 million better off, or there was the Martello Lakes Resort, which made you £1 million worse off. And the Cabinet decided against doing that. It wasn't acceptable to those who voted against, so they continued to pursue the development of Prince's Parade. And I was repeatedly told to trust the council's numbers and that they knew what they were doing. And then we wind forward to the report we've got in front of us. Because instead of £29 million, the total project cost is now £45.3 million. The identified funding for it is £38.7 million. And there's a funding gap of £6.6 million, with the report itself saying at 3.6.3 that we need an additional £10 million worth of borrowing, which, as Councillor Wybrow has said, gets repaid. The funding proposal for that is that we borrow it, and that cost savings over the next 50 years will repay the interest and principal of that £10 million. Despite that explosion of cost, despite leaving a £10 million chasm in the position, the report's arguing we keep going. If I put forward a proposal 2 years ago that we should build a sports centre with a £10 million cost, a £10 million hole, you'd have laughed me out of the chamber. And yet you're still going with it. It's a poor attitude to risk. It's not the way that we should be taking this forward. As Councillor Wybrow said, we've now got the stage whereby the sale of the site and the houses and the value of the South Road swimming pool site is at this moment listed as £26.6 million. I don't know who the developer is. None of us in this chamber, as far as I'm aware, know who, or none of the councillors know who that developer is. I don't want to. I don't think we need to. But that developer is paying somewhere around £150,000 per plot. 26 million divided by 150. Add on construction costs, margin, the limited amount of affordable housing which is required, and we all know that affordable is affordable for a definition of affordable, but not necessarily affordable to anyone who actually wants to live here. Anyone who thinks that those houses, when the plot cost is 150,000 each, are going to be anything other than unaffordable to the huge majority of residents is going to be really disappointed. So I've still got a bigger problem with the costs than I did 2 years ago. Because 2 years ago you had a basically financially balanced scheme. Now you don't. We've basically got a scheme whereby we're being told we've got to keep going because we're into this now and we can't stop. We can stop it. There is an alternative site. There has always been an alternative site since I joined this council because you negotiated it. You did very well negotiating it, and we should still use it. We're still doing the wrong thing here, and I'd still say that the numbers, although I'd just like to say that the team that you've got here today have been really good and really reassuring on terms of the construction numbers and some of the questions around contamination. And I really thank them for their time in doing that. That's been really helpful. They can't undo the basic fact that this was a project which was meant to be financially balanced, give or take a bit, and it really isn't anymore. It's a long way from that. It leaves this council in a big hole of debt. Sorry.
If I may, Leader, can I just make a factual correction? Thank you, Councillor Prater, for drawing attention to paragraph 3.6.3. The reference to 10 million is suggesting that the revenue turnaround would be sufficient to cover 10 million. That's not what is being proposed. So I just wanted to make a factual correction. Thank you.
Councillor Prater.
Okay, so we just got to accept that the funding gap is £6.6 million as opposed to 10 million. I stand corrected.
Okay, any other comments on that?
Yes, thank you, Leader. I asked a question the other day about, had we not had so many delays, what would be our position now? And I was given the answer we would now be opening our swimming pool. So I think that just about sums it up, why we're actually in this position. And I just hope that this doesn't continue, so that we actually do get our swimming pool and we get it constructed and available for the people of the district, the whole district, not just Hythe. It is a swimming pool and leisure centre for Folkestone and Hythe District.
Thank you. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. And I thank councillors for their forensic investigations, and I thank the team for their responses. I've always openly and enthusiastically supported the Princess Parade project because I believe that the new leisure centre, swimming pools, outdoor cafe, safe vehicle-free promenade with safe access to the beach for everyone is a huge benefit. A new protected open space with a linear park promoting the heritage of the RMC, I think is a huge benefit. Removal of a fast rat run whilst maintaining alternative calmer traffic routes all become an additional crown and the jewel in the crown of Hythe, and I would think it would be a great placemaker for Hythe in the future and its future generations. Having said this, I have in previous meetings with officers and contractors expressed my concerns about the rising costs, and that I would struggle to continue with these, to support these, so I was much relieved when BAM capped their price, taking further risks on their own shoulders. I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Hoddeby's remarks that had it not been for the delays to the review, which then delayed the public inquiry, we would have been in the ground by now and be thinking about an opening date. As for Martello Lakes, those costs 2 years ago will have equally risen dramatically since then, without any real costings done and without any real understanding of where we need to borrow for that, which I'm sure we would. So I think the answer that some of the borrowing might be coverable by the enhanced income from the operator is encouraging, because I don't think you would get that offer of a 300,000 turnaround in revenue income because of the loss of, because you don't have to support the old Hythe swimming pool from any other site, simply because there is so much open access for the passing public to use the cafe and the facilities. So I'm coming to the contamination reports. Residents have quite rightly expressed their concerns, and having listened to this evening's comments, I'm much more confident that we can cope with those. And I think we then have to look at the downsides. If we don't go ahead, Hythe won't get a new pool for the foreseeable future. The old pool would have to be closed because there's only times you can repair an old coat, and we cannot afford to keep hemorrhaging £100,000 a year trying to keep that place going. Remediation, as we've heard, is likely to have to still be done at a cost. And finally, I would just say that if we didn't go ahead, F&HDC would be sitting on a recognised, extremely high-value brownfield site, which outline permission for housing has been given, and it would be very remiss of the council not to take that into account, that it could actually move forward and be forced to take the whole up for housing development and earn a huge amount of money that could be spent elsewhere in the district. So I'm still fully in support of moving forward with this project as it's laid out now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Wimble.
Thank you, Leader. I sit on a number of economic development meetings where we go and talk to construction companies all over the southeast, house construction companies like Pentland Homes and things like that. And at the last meeting we went there, I don't know if Mr. Benchley can confirm this, but the general cost of construction over the last 5 years has gone up anywhere between 25 and 45%. So again, I'm just saying that as a layperson, but if he could confirm that, again, to me, it shows that if we'd have moved forward with this in the very first instance, we would have been pretty much on budget if it hadn't been for all the delays.
Councillor Prater and then Councillor Godfrey.
I'm sorry, I like this revisionist approach. There is table 3 in your document, gives where the cost differences from the original are. The first £5.4 million worth of it is additional site remediation and groundworks, and it goes from there. The delay for normal inflation due to the result of the judicial review is under £2 million of the total increase of 16 million. You can make your case any way you want, but don't try revising the numbers actually in the report in front of you.
Councillor Godfrey.
I was simply coming back on a point I forgot to make. I was particularly delighted to see the PVs going on this site, because as Mr. Madden would tell you, 2 years ago I was pushing for that and I met some resistance, but we won that one. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Hollingsby.
I just have to, in response to Councillor Frater, I would suggest also that the current market conditions, the 3.8 million, also relate to the delay.
Councillor Mrs Wybrow.
Well, I mean, if we're going to go on that, the value of the housing land has gone up considerably as well, so I think that at least cancels out the rising costs, so I don't think we can blame any of this on the judicial review. It is the fact that the conditions were much worse than the council thought, and it was flagged up to the council that was likely to be the case.
Councillor Peel.
Thank you, Leader. I've listened to everything tonight. It's obviously, you know, my thoughts on Prince's Parade and development there. It's been nice today to have some real experts in the room, and I would like to thank our guests tonight. There's some actual real comments there rather than bedside experts that we've suffered for the last few years on this. So thank you for reassuring, for being very open, being very clear on both the positives and the negatives of this. I think that's been really helpful. It would be useful if the same experts could be come back for the full council. I don't know if that's a possibility or not, because I think allowing access for other councillors would be very useful on the evening to give a greater level of reassurance, I think, to the debate that we've had there. I'm keen to see this move forward on the basis, as Councillor Godfrey's just said, around the fact that this pool will be running itself. It will be there'll be no cost to the council any further for running this. It's always been an issue with Hythe Pool. And I have to say, when I first became a councillor and a cabinet member, which is 10, 12 years ago now, frighteningly enough, I was asked when and where and how we were going to put in a new Hythe Pool at that point from the late great Councillor Capon, the county councillor for Hythe, who had been campaigning for a new pool in Hythe for the previous 20 years. So this is well overdue. We have an opportunity here. I would not be supporting anything outside of the Prince's Parade site because of, as Councillor Godfrey says, it's a destination site. It is self-sustaining. Anywhere else would continue to have costs to this council. And as a Hawkinge councillor or a North Downs East councillor, I'm fed up with paying in my council tax for other people for benefits, for those kind of things. So I wish we could move on and move on quickly.
Thank you. Has any councillor got a point to make that hasn't been made before? Okay, in which case I'll go to the report and to the recommendations which are proposed by me and seconded by Councillor Godfrey, and would ask all those in favour. Those against? Thank you.
Can we ask that it's recorded which votes were against? I'm sure that
I'm
sure history will work it out.
Okay, now we come
Leader, I'm happy to be recorded on the basis of having voted for.
Agenda item 17, update on the development of the Highview site. Councillor Godfrey.